Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Jane. I'm the co-chair of the Diane Lewis Student Lecture Series Committee of the School of Architecture. The Diane Lewis Student Lecture Series curated by 4 students. We are deeply grateful for their continued support from Elise Jaffe and Jeffrey Brown, whose contributions enable us to carry forward this lecture series. I also want to thank Mauricio Higuera, Monica Shapiro, Jervin Jamali, Haley Eber, and other members of the Student Lecture Series Committee for their dedication to organizing our lectures. We are also grateful for the lecture nominations from our peers. It is also my pleasure to introduce Professor Pelin, whose work stands at the intersection of architecture, geography, urbanism, and art. Pelin is the recipient of the Keith Haring Fellowship of Art and Activism at Bard College and currently serves as a professor at the University of Batman in southeastern Turkey. Her scholarship has shaped publications such as the Urban Society Report, Climates, Architecture in the Planetary Imaginary, Refugee Heritage, Radical Pedagogies, From Public to Commons, and Agnostic Assemblies. Her forthcoming books include Forms of Non-Belonging and Threshold Architecture. She is also an accomplished curator and filmmaker, with her most recent short documentary, Landscapes and Archives, about the production of architecture in Palestine, featured at the Qatar Foundation in Ramallah in 2023. Professor Tan has long been engaged with questions around urban and territorial conflict, labor conditions, commons, and alternative pedagogies. Her research challenges traditional architectural practice by its acknowledgement of collective assemblies and pedagogies of commons, more so how these platforms and assemblies function as emancipative forms of solidarity, care, resistance, and knowledge production. Professor Tan questions the use of these alternative pedagogies in unlearning and undoing, and their ability to reach beyond institutional structures and into the realm of contested territories through transversal and collective approach. To revisit our statement that we have endeavored to explore this year, we remember that architecture is not a frozen concept within the space it has engineered, but a transmutable narrative, a story that is embedded within the landscape it occupies, the community it serves, and the ever-changing reality it reflects. We first heard from Charles Waldheim, who gave us an insight into lives of people in rural China through the lens of agriculture and landscape. Last month, we listened to Mohammed Naleh stories and writing on southern Lebanon and how darkness is woven into life-making practices, how architecture can be charged with the urgency to overcome Western metaphors of light and darkness. We not only look at how architecture speaks through its provocation of thought, emotion, and experience, and also not only its manipulation as a force of control or tool of colonial repression, but architecture as a basis or grounds for transformation and resistance. Following the lecture, there will be a Q&A session, followed by a post-lecture dinner in the lobby for further conversation and connection. Thank you again for your continued presence and participation. And without further ado, please join us in welcoming Professor Pelin.
Thank you. Jane, how many minutes I have? 40 something. 45. Yeah. I would like to thank you very much for inviting. I met Jane in Beirut this summer in Lebanon when I was in the field research, and this week for a week I'm in New York. I organize few things together that I can do this talk. I'm not an architect. I'm a sociologist by education, but I worked in architecture faculties in many places, and basically I'm based in Turkey. I'm Turkish. I'm not living in the US because I'm saying because few people were asking me about that. I live in southeast of Turkey, and actually the reason why I'm living there is 11 years ago we went there to found an architecture faculty, and we were invited to establish an architecture faculty. And with my colleagues, we wanted to do a kind of a social engage architecture syllabus and pedagogy. And It was, I mean, we failed, of course. I will tell you why we failed. It was an unsuccessful approach and thing. Because of the architecture profession itself. I mean, there is a problem with the profession itself, with the education itself. So we failed, but it's a lot of experience. I just want to start with some. I mean, we have this urgent pedagogy ongoing project, which is supported, invited, and supported by IASP, Swedish Art Council in Stockholm. And we are running this since with my colleague Marcus Eriksson since 5-6 years, which is about archiving alternative architectural and design pedagogical initiatives or courses or events and other kind of from different part of the world. And this is a kind of an archive I will explain. And then also I have a short documentary on Palestinian architectural production that consists of interviews with Palestinian architects, basically in West Bank, in Ramallah and Bethlehem. Maybe you want to watch that later, 20 minutes. I want to show 3 minutes that starts with an interview of Elias and Yusuf Anastas and about their practice. But let me a little bit explain what we have done with my colleagues and myself in the last 10 years. I have a title which is very heavy. It's called Survival Through Decoloniality, Alliances, Survival. We hear this words more and more in these days. It's very theoretical, loaded words, but at the same time, there's a lot of discussion going on around that. If you're interested, we will be on Sunday evening in Woodbine, and we will focus to discuss again this topic through some other texts by David Graeber and David Wengrow, The Dawn of Humanity. If you're interested, please come that evening too. There will be food also for free. And and we repeat this a lot: decolonialism, decoloniality, and what we are meaning. It is a more common discussion in this part of the world. I think in Turkey, especially, I mean, this kind of discussion, you don't see it in an architectural studio at all. But in Europe, in other parts, I have been in some studios, and it's a really big topic, and people are really trying to understand in a design education, design studio, how we can really besides fetishizing this concept, how we can really, how design and architectural approach or understanding of space can really function, can really make sense. So this is the kind of alliances and survival. I mean, if you don't have alliances, you don't survive. You don't survive by yourself anymore. You need alliances, and you need a good trusted alliances, and alliances are translocal. It's really borderless, and I think this is very important. And for pedagogical approach, I believe that, I mean, there are a lot of institutional obstacles in design faculties, in architecture faculties, and in universities, in different geographies, in different cities. But creating a pedagogical practice in or outside of institution is very transversal, very difficult and rich at the same time, and I'm trying to do that. I found some in my approach when I think about decoloniality. I think I published one text, decolonial education, in a book edited by Doina Petrescu. This was a social production of architecture. We did this book in 2016. And in this book, I was trying to describe, I mean, how different kind of archiving, for example, archival approach can function to bring something that is being not seen, because normally the archives are hiding what you shouldn't see or should see, you know. And this decolonial practice, I think, very much related to archival practice too. Archives will practice is sounds very institutional, very has a lot of history, but I think it becomes more and more important where is destruction and war these days. Who holds the archives, who wants to show what from the archives. So autonomous archives are very important, I think, and it's part of it. And pedagogies, like really inventing different alliances of pedagogies, different forms of learning, collective learning, unlearning, I think is important. I learned a lot in the architecture faculties as a sociologist in the studios that how scale and the drive for dwelling is still very vital and very important. I mean, we are still dealing with, in the 21st century, sheltering. You know, sheltering is still very important. People lose their house of enforced migrated situation, war, and so on and so on. And we're dealing with high housing speculation in big cities. We cannot pay our rent in big cities. Still is a big crisis, and I think this is very important, the scale of settlement or housing. Are we speaking about a corridor, a self-made corridor in a refugee camp, the scale of a corridor? Or are we speaking about a big town with 1 million, for example, in case not maybe in US is something, but in Turkey, 1 million population that is under conflict. I mean, is dealing with continuously conflict urbanism, and this conflict urbanism supports housing speculation and real estate investment. So it's very interesting that how things come together and how scale matters in such a way. Territorial proximity is very important. Where I'm living is that Iraqi and Syrian border is only 40 minutes by car. And what is happening sometimes in what city affects the border beyond the border, other territories. And the territories can get very squeezed, and sometimes I feel it's very getting larger and then squeezed again. So I feel always the fluidity through different kind of dynamics. This dynamics can be the effect of war, effect of attack, or an infrastructure of a water dam and its effect, water, and many other things. And permanency and temporary is very important. 1 second, I have to do this, I think, full screen. I try to go through those concepts through this. I mean, you can say that it can be methodologies, it can be strategies, but I'm trying to redefine, and it's very open for discussion that how we will take it. I have this 20 minutes film, but I want to say something that basically this is a work I did in Palestine with kind of interviewing sociologists and architects about the ongoing production of space, and especially in West Bank, which is not a big place, but you may be familiar that how it is controlled and how the built environment is being fragmented by Israeli government, and it's like an open prison, West Bank. And whenever I'm there, I feel I'm in an open prison. And there are a lot of architects and designers. They are trying to continue their practice. This work, this kind of research, I titled "Landscape as Archives." That landscapes are changing, transforming so fast, with the effect of many things by human and non-humans, and how we can keep it as an archival. How we can think landscape as an archive. I think this was mostly. The concept of landscape, I was mostly inspired by Masao Adachi, a Japanese video filmmaker, activist. who lived a lot in Bekaa Valley in Lebanon, and then currently he's in Japan, but he spent, I think, 25 years with Paleo in Bekaa, and he did a lot of recordings. And he says always, landscape is the place where the struggle happens. I mean, the struggle is important to check not only where the people and to society is, but it's also we have to really understand how the landscape is transforming through that. So I try to look in that sense. I started some pedagogical collaboration with Alessandro Petti and Sandy Hilal, decolonizing architecture, that they established in an initiative in Bethlehem. And this initiative was kind of a residency research initiative. They started Campus and Camp. Campus and Camp is also a kind of, let's say, third generation Palestinian refugees. I'm saying third generation after Nakba, 1948. And in Daesh Palestinian refugee camp near almost inside the city of Bethlehem. So you can go online and you can see all the activities they're doing. And there is also a collective dictionary that they created. We started, I brought my students to Daesh, and we several times we did together some workshop called autonomous infrastructure. So the infrastructure was the key word for us, both in a metaphorical sense and also in a very physical infrastructure, how we can survive without infrastructure, or how we can create threshold infrastructures, how we can find in between structures that we survive through with them together. This was one workshop I'm going to show with my slide too, but this was something that was done in Campus and Camp. I just wanted to introduce this Campus Camp because it's a very active one. After that, while I was searching communalities, how it affects the space and how space is formed through that, what is the exchange in the refugee camps. That was mostly a field research I did in Jordan and in West Bank and Daesh. And also Al-Favar camp, which is in north of Hebron, was very active in creating. During my research, when I was doing also reading a lot about pedagogies, alternative pedagogies, I started to do a kind of contributing a course on critical spatial practices in Al-Quds University, is a university in West Bank. And Bard College, Bard is collaborating, has a kind of department, critical spatial practice. So, I came across with Musa Alami Farm, which is in Jericho. This was that Musa Alami, a kind of early Palestinian nationalist entrepreneur person, was he built an agricultural farm, and he turned into a school in 1949 until 1967. So I was hearing about the school, about the agricultural land, but nobody exactly knew where was it, and it was outside of Jericho, and the farm is still functioning with producing dairy production and so on. But I went there and I found it, and then I got in contact with the Arab Development Society that was established and built by Musa Alami, and he this society helped me to enter their archive. And I started to research, and I was looking also that who is researching this site, because it's a modern architectural heritage. Those buildings, this ateliers and studios is a large land and so on. And you see images from the video. This is a promotional video because Musa Alami got a lot of money for Ford Foundation from other foundation outside of Palestine, and he supported his project. And many orphans after 1948 were camping, who were in a refugee camp, tent camp. They started to work and learn in this place. And this is this video. This you can see how they were planning. It was very interesting for me first to think and a kind of a threshold infrastructure as a pedagogical project, and then as a place of survival after 1948 for some people, for some orphans. And this is I wrote a piece for the Radical Pedagogy book edited by Beatriz Colomina, because Beatriz asked me to really focus and write on this. And it was very difficult for accessing some archives. Some archives is in, some boxes are in Cambridge in England, and some are in Arab Development Society, and some is Musa Alami's personal house, personal library, and so on. And Selim Tamari, a sociologist from Ramallah, helped me. And I heard that Dima Yasser, an architect from Birzeit, was also interested, and she did a workshop with student design workshop there. So I did reach her, and we started to work with Dima together. And this was also for me a kind of a historical example of how we can think about pedagogical structure as a threshold infrastructure. You know, I was thinking about that mostly. And I brought my student from Al-Quds to there, and I did my classes. I started to do some of my teaching also in this farm. They offered me the seminar room and so on. And for me, it was very important to reactivate, because it is not in use. Most of the 70% of the farm, but still is alive, is there. So it was interesting project for me, heritage, alternative pedagogy, survival after 1948, and that comes all together. And with Dima, we wrote a large chapter for a new book that I can share also for is about Arab architecture, designing modernity. And it could be maybe if you want to search further. But this was something that it developed my ideas about how this can be a support structure, how this plan, these buildings are designed, and how it is. The school is this agricultural school. I mean, it's not a school, simple school, but it's kind of an agricultural school that you learn everything, and you have a lot of opportunities to have a lot of studios, ateliers, and so on. There are a lot of details, but it was something for me important. I was thinking more and researching more about threshold infrastructure. This is a field research I did in Pearl River Delta in fishing villages. I was in sabbatical in a design school of Polytechnic in Hong Kong for a year, and in 2016. And I was very interested with, there was a big infrastructural highways construction. Now they are done, they are in use, but that time they were constructing from Hong Kong to Macau, from Hong Kong to other places, big crossing the delta, big bridges and other kind of housing projects, big projects. And this were a little bit destroying the small fishing villages. And it was very difficult to find those fishing villages. The fishing villages were squeezed between those big infrastructures. And this is a woman, fisherwoman. There are fishermen, but there are fisherwomen. And the fisherwomen, they use their body to design these, and this kind of what I'm holding here is something that catch seafood, to make seafood, the small fishes. And this was a lot of work because I don't know Chinese, and this was really. But the Chinese people think I know Chinese, but I always say no, I don't know Chinese. But because I spent a lot of time with them, and it's always like body language, speaking, intuition, and so on. So there were many villages, and they had a different kind of identities. And this is again, I end up doing a small documentary. Today, I'm not sharing that, but if you're wanting, I can share the link. You see another woman here, fisherwoman, who is making her own net, small scale. And the cycle is that they go for in the night, 2 a.m. and so on, with their families fishing in the Pearl River Delta. 11 a.m. they have to handle everything to the fishmongers. And then they do the everyday children cleaning, and then they do this kind of designing their own thing. 24 hours work for a woman. It was very important for me also to understand the female labor, how it is connected to space making, their place making. Actually, in my research, what I figured out, if you analyze the female labor, it's very easy then a bit understand the space, how it is constructed, and you can go deeper to what is behind the construction or the structure of the space. These are little gardens. And this is from the village. This is the oldest fishing village that I'm standing, and you see the whole this bridge. This was in 2016. The bridge is done now, but this was something that you see kind of a monster is coming from the other side. I use a lot when I say labor. I use a lot Gibson Graham, Judy Graham, and Catherine Gibson's search and books. I'm reading always since 20 years their stuff. I think for me it's important how they are defining heterogeneous economy in space. They are economic feminist geographer, and they have a lot of field research in the territories. And it's very important for me to find a methodology to understand. And they claim that the economy is very heterogeneous. It's a capitalist economy, of course, but it's very heterogeneous. And this heterogeneity actually gives some possibilities for community economies, for different kind of layered work and labor that you can create solidarities and so on. This is one argument that is more common in practices, that the economy of commons, for example. And then the other part of it is that to gain some methodology, how to work in field, how to understand space, how to understand the building, how it works, how people are engaged, what is the work and labor condition in there. It gives me kind of a strategy to get to diverse economies, to look to female fisherwoman, female labor, and how her house, her ship, and how the village is organized as spatially gives a lot of information. So this is a refugee camp near my city where I'm living. It was in 2015. This is a camp that is not existing anymore. It was around almost 1 year self-organized camp, and it was hosting around 3,000 in the beginning Yazidi communities who did run away from Shengal by foot and from ISIS and reach to Mardin, where I'm living. And some of them are hosted for a year in a bus station, which was just designed and was going to open for the public, but then it transformed into a refugee camp. It was interesting to see that there is a design agenda for a building or for a structure, and then you see it that is totally used in a different way. This was also interesting that how the spaces have potentialities, and in an urgency, in an emergency, how it is being used differently and what are the possibilities. This is a self-made corridor with blanket, wood, and And this plastic material that United Nations gives always, you see everywhere in the camps. And this is for tent making, but this material is being used for other things too, covering your bed, making a window with that, covering your toilet or something like that. So this is a corridor because we needed this corridor always because this woman, they wanted to be in a semi-public spaces. They don't wanted to sit directly in front of their tent, but they wanted to have a little bit kind of a privacy for tea drinking. So this was a place in the right side that we were sitting and having tea. And this corridor was very important for me, metaphorically also. There is another long corridor that they built. This is something connecting some of their tents. If they're a big family, they have few tents and they want to connect them. And by connecting, they're using this kind of self-made corridors. I'm speaking in this region. I'm in this region now. I jumped from Pearl River Delta to here. I want you to make some kind of connection with the idea of infrastructure and scale. Here, we faced in 2013 with the Syrian civil war a lot of refugees, and still here in this region, and now mainly everywhere in Turkey, I think, also in the West Coast, all the agricultural, especially agricultural workers are Syrian refugees, Syrian immigrants. I don't want to say immigrants. I don't want to say also refugees because in a juridical statute, they are not exactly refugee, but they're under protection of United Nations, UN and Turkish government. But they are not totally immigrants. Immigrant has a different kind of statute, accessibility to health insurance, that and this. But mostly the refugees in between documented and undocumented, even the documented, they don't have access to health hospitals and so on. I can, if you want, if you're curious, I can give more details later. But there is a kind of a different statute in Turkey. With my with my architecture student, we worked in the camps, and my students were really wanted to design camps and actually I had one master student who was working in the urban planning department of government, and he designed one camp, the Midyat refugee camp, which is very 1 hour north of Mardin. And this refugee camp was one of the first that has designed and has a lot of services. I was trying to tell my design student, no, we won't design. I'm not interested in designing camp, but we will learn how they design themselves from them. And this was the idea. And the second important thing was in the studio. I was running my colleague, the advanced master studio, because I'm not an architect. I'm not officially cannot run studio in architecture faculty. So they always put an architect near me to justify the studio. It's very funny, but this is the education structure. So I think it's maybe same in US. With the student, the second thing was, okay, first thing was we have to learn about this kind of emergency infrastructure, how are they established, how they are formed by the refugees, how they last, what will happen after the afterlife of the refugee camp, and what is the if they stay, what is the continuation. So there is one thing. And second thing was how a collective life exists and how common spaces in the camps, how we can analyze that. So this was one idea for my student, that they come up mostly to create alternative economies, structures, and spaces of being together. We created a booklet. If you're interested, I can share that. It's in Arabic and Kurdish and in English and Turkish. We try to make multi-language because the refugees, they were speaking Kurdish and Arabic, and my students are Kurdish and they speak the same language. Some of them are Arab. Sometimes they speak a little bit Arabic too, but the main language is Kurdish, Kurmanji. And this was important first to check. Maybe you know architect Manuel Hertz, who did work on African refugee camp, and he had an argument that in his thesis and his work that the camps are very active places. It's not exactly enclosed places. There are many actors in the camps. Many things are happening, and it's very socially very active places, very in transformation always. And we try to check in this camp, for example, who were the agencies, who were working with the refugees, what they were doing together, and so on. There were many association and union working voluntarily with the children, with the women, and so on. Every camp had a self-organized garden, and we try to map those gardens, how it is situating itself in the daily life of the refugee camp. And we were curious that how in a temporary condition you can establish a permanent practice, which is gardening. You know, you need the soil and seed, and you need it long time, but you don't know if you will be there tomorrow. You know, this was this kind of thing that we were curious about. We documented all the design, what the refugees did, like from lightening to the toilets, to the shower, to the tent, everything what they built themselves. We transformed, we did a visual archive, and then we transformed to architectural language. So we did the opposite, other way around, like not first design, drawing and building, but in contrast. So I try to understand how we can archive this, how we can archive a camp. And this camp doesn't exist anymore. If you and we have this booklet only, or what we documented. This was very important for us to learn from them, from the women, especially how they are building their everyday life of daily life, and how they are cooking and working and so on. We went other camps in Mytilene Island. We went to in Athens to City Plaza, which was a camp that was inside the city center, that occupied by Greek activists and refugee families, by arguing that the camp doesn't need to be outside of a city, which we want to have a camp exactly in the center of the city, and we want to be engaged in the everyday life, although no one was an official citizen, but in status of refugee. So this was also 3.5 years running in an empty hotel, a refugee kind of collective space, I would say. This was also interesting. This is Pikpa camp. Pikpa camp was in Mytilene, receiving and offering shelter for the refugees who are arriving from the sea. And coming back to Palestine, to Daisheh camp, this is the structure that Alessandro and Sandy designed. It's called concrete tent. And this tent, you see us the first day, we are here 2015. We are here on the first day with David Harvey, actually together. He joined us in our trip with my student and all. And we did the first forum with the Daisheh Palestinian camp habitants and people, and all together. This concrete tent was designed with them. I mean, the idea came together when the architects told me, because I was surprised why a tent as a concrete tent. I was thinking that tent, sometimes a refugee tent, I mean, in that case, for me, was a little bit very romanticizing and maybe fetishizing the, that I wasn't, I said, oh, this is an architectural work, of course. I mean, the architects will do that, this kind of approach I had. And I said, why did you do that? And they told me, Pelin, this was together a decision with the people of Taishe. And tent is an important symbol for Palestinian people. And we did it especially in the material of concrete, which is an opposite material of a normal tent. That is about permanency, concrete. I mean, and then tent itself as an idea or as a normal if you use it is a temporary shelter. So it's we wanted to make a kind of a open a discussion about temporariness and permanency. How we can live in a temporary life, establishing permanent discussion, garden, living spaces, and then opposite also. So this was a kind of, again, what I mentioned, this autonomous infrastructure workshop we did together with the Daishe and Alfavar youth and my student and so on, in order to discuss many things about practice of commoning. This is a rooftop garden in Alfavar camp in the Women's Center. They are very active. This is dropping water roof garden. And we did a lot of started a lot of doing workshop in Gaziantep, for example, when I was invited by the Chamber of Architects. My student here, you see Ümit and Bureyde, I think it's very important. There was a empty train station, and they transformed the empty train station in their design proposal, a kind of a shelter for refugees. Gaziantep, the city near Turkey, near Mardin, has the biggest, largest Syrian refugee population. And they're working a lot in many service system and agricultural land and so on. This is the City Plaza Hotel that I mentioned in Athens. This is a piece I wrote for the Chicago Architecture Biennial book. And this piece is about discussion about temporariness and also camp in the city, camp in the urban space. How can you run a collective refugee? I don't want to even say camp because it is against the idea what they did, but a kind of a collective space with the refugees together, organizing the everyday life, food, cooking. I was cooking there a lot because if you are there and if you want to do something, first you need to cook and you need to share the everyday life, bringing children to school and this and that. And this was more important for me to understand the urban scale and then the scale of the commonings practices in the space. And then they decided together to leave the space after 3.5 years. And this was something also important, that how with collective decision, they stopped this kind of threshold infrastructure. I want to introduce this urban pedagogy project also, but first, this autonomous infrastructure, we continue, we participated in some exhibition. I was invited with Marta Roser to Milan Architecture Triennial, and we started to think about, again, Marta's work on housing and home and gentrification of New York, of course, that maybe if you know her work. And we started also to open this kind of discussion in different kind of cities and practices. And we created an online archive with interviews and so on. This was one way to think together and convey our experiences. Another project was I did with Keller. Keller Esterling did a kind of a digital project with her student, basically, collecting many solidarity practices on refugeehood, and called Many. And it was a kind of a digital application that you can, I think, download to your app and so on. And this was presented in the American US Pavilion in the Venice Biennial. I forgot the year, but this was also interesting how you can convey the knowledge, your experience into different kind of architectural and urban spatial, critical spatial practice discipline perspective. I think my time is bit, how is my time? Jenny?
How much do you have?
I need more, a lot of time, 1 hour or something. I want to show quickly, shortly what we are doing in the southeast of Turkey. This was what I did. It was only an introduction, Jenny. I'm living in a place where we are affected very much by a big water dam project by the Turkish state. And this water dam project affecting all the climate in a bad way. Also, it resulted with forcing many villages to leave and to destroy, or many villages are underwater. And we doing a lot of work on archiving and documenting the region, which is around the Tigris River, from Mardin, Midyat, Batman, Diyarbakir, 4 big cities, and near the borderline also from the Nusaybin and beyond. And we call this kind of water dam, I mean, the government itself is called security infrastructure, security water dam, is basically a kind of a tool we are thinking and we are arguing it's a kind of a tool for controlling the territory. And this is also resulting in many current and future disaster, I would say. There are many activists, ecology activists are really working and trying to they have a lot of association and platforms are trying to work against it, but it's a bit unsuccessful in the way that you see here in 2019 the river, and then in 2020 the rise of the water. My office is just near the shore. I can see the river from my office, and the river destroyed basically a main historical village town, a touristic. It was also a touristic town, and they filled the water dam project was filled with a lot of landfills and cementing the landscape. This was something that ended up with a lot of conflict, housing conflict, that many families had to be evicted and moved to a new housing. Also, there's a lot of transhumance practice going on. There's a lot of nomads, and those transhumans, rural nomads, are losing also their free movement, mobility between the landscape, because the water dam comes with the highways and tunnels and checkpoints. So it's not, the water dam is not itself an infrastructure. It's a kind of a political entity, is an agency. And this impacts a lot of tools and strategies that controls the territory. That is, many communities are affected. The green hinterland are very important. Here you see an important part of the city of Diyarbakir. We work in this place a lot. This is mostly grazing land, and grazing land is very important, but then grazing land is very easy to grab and privatize and open for private interest. And the government, also the local businessman, not only the Turkish government, but also local Kurdish businessmen are very interested to transform in this property place. But this is, in that case, very dispossessed women or poor families who are cultivating this grazing land are losing their survival infrastructure. So this is a kind of a discussion going on. With the Chamber of Architects, we do a lot of workshop here, walking, giving a lot of information, how is important that many citizens are using this grazing land, and this grazing land is under how I can say danger of being removed with housing projects and other kind of infrastructural projects, and how we can keep the daily practices of such women, of poor people, and so on. We do a lot of documenting and workshop, and especially for architecture students, we do a lot of informative workshop that they can understand in a larger way how citizens are surviving in this space, and at the same time there is a very harsh, very capitalist housing market going on that want to get this space. You see here collective tandoori bread making spaces. One of my friend who's an architect, Zeynep Ataç, that was from my architecture faculty. She has a project. I don't have the website now. I want to share the project. She mapped all those collective tandoori houses that women come together and do their bread, and she digitalized. She put it as an archive on a website. I want to share this. It's a very interesting project that she's working on that. We do this workshop. In this workshop, generally, police joins us. We do together with the policies. The police likes very much our workshop. They always want to participate. All those extractive zones that I'm focusing in my region right now, in my second part of my presentation, I refer a lot, I read a lot Macarena's, my friend's work, who worked a lot on Latin America and many non-human elements and indigenous societies, communities, how they are connected to environments, and how they're resisting to other extractive strategies from private companies or state and so on. It's almost a similar example that we are living in my region where I'm living. So I think I suggest very much, if you're interested, to read her book, Extractive Zone is called, by Duke Press. It could be very interesting, especially to make connection with other part of the world about how extractive capitalism is, what kind of strategies is using, and in what territory, how they are functioning, and what are the resistance against. I have a kind of a different. I know architects are having interesting application that they can use. I use Padlet. It's very simple, and I put my videos and recordings and interviews on the landscape by using the Padlet. You can go online. I can give this. I mean, you can copy this web page. Whatever I see, especially I focus on women in around Tigris River, how they are creating their spaces, how they are producing their daily food, how they're dealing with ingredients, how they're preserving and fermenting. And you see here a shepherd who's making cheese. But we do other things too, besides workshops and pedagogical practices. We know the local people, and they need always help, especially in court cases with the Chamber of Architects. And the law bar of Mardin and Diyarbakir. They are very active in Batman, and we are collaborating together a lot, and they're helping a lot those people, and we are trying to mediate in between that. And we are trying to protect the grazing lands. This is important. Foresting is one of the strategy. We are looking for how we can establish cooperatives. We are establishing now a female cooperative with Ezidi community. And we try to build some seed archives and some other kind of archives that can host some kind of structure that can host the archives. There are some nomads. And last year we did. I have friends in eco design in Boden, in Balzano, an experimental design department in Hamburg. Jesko Faeser is an important architect on social engaged architecture, social engaged design. 10 years ago, we did in Mardin a workshop called Rural Commons that we collaborated with Kurdish villagers. And this time we wanted to repeat again after 10 years. And we did then in Batman, we collaborated with the village. And we used the village as a design studio exactly there. And of course, we were lost in translation. The village is speaking Kurdish and Turkish and Italians, Germans, and it was really, in the beginning was difficult. But what we wanted in the studio, we asked the village what they want. And they wanted to have three things. One thing was that they wanted to have their, there is a space, it's called Taziye Evleri, Taziye houses, Evis house. Taziye Evleri means that when you have a funeral, it's a funeral house. It's a direct translation. But funeral house is very important in the southeast of Turkey. I mean, I'm from West Coast and we don't have funeral house. But here is very important because when someone dies, the 3 days, there is a long funeral visits. And you need those collective semi-public spaces. So they had this kind of space and they asked us, they want to use for cultural event too. And they asked the designers, can you transform it into a cultural house also? And then they wanted to have a big barbecue space in their land. And then they wanted to have a few things more. And they worked together like 10 days in this village and using this village together as a space. You can ask me more questions, but this was very important for us to run a studio outside and with the people together. It is something like maybe similar to rural architecture practice studio, rural studio, I think it was the name. And I think this, in my region, I think this kind of strategy of pedagogy works very well, but it maybe in different places can work differently. Just my last slides. Decolonial pedagogies with Alessandro and Sandy. Maybe you heard that last year they got the what is this called? Nora, what was the award in Venice Biennial? The Golden Lion for their project, Entity of Decolonization, Borgoriza. This is a project is in Sicily, a fascist settlement that Sandy and Alessandro and with their all comrades, they're trying to, with the collaboration with the municipality, they are trying to change the usage of the buildings, not demolishing it, but transforming it and transforming it in a decolonized structure. Am I right, Nora, here? How I summarize this whole project? But they run the studio there every 6 months, I think, maybe even. We were there last May, to really connect our practices again, and to understand this, how the space, what they want to do, how is the process going on. And I think this was also for me to learning how to collaborate with the mayor, and how to make a sustainable decolonial design practice. I think it's very difficult. I mean, you need really, like in my case, in the southeast of Turkey, you need many agencies like the bar, the law bar, the architecture chambers, the urban planning chambers that I'm often working, and most of my graduate students are member of this. I mean, one of my former students is the head of the Batman architecture chamber. So it is important that you have these entities that connects with the design studios, and then of course with the local people, more local people too, but how to make sustainable such decolonial practice, instead of having short-term, I mean, short-term, this kind of project has a lot of effect too. I don't want to undermine this, but always is important, if you collaborate with local people, how to really establish a sustainable long-term structure. This becomes important in the design question. I spoke a lot. I showed many things, I know, but I hope it's entangled. I'm still trying to understand, to work on that. I want to show 3 minutes, the beginning of the video, and then I will share the YouTube link that you can watch. But I want you to listen a bit. Yusuf and Elias, who are trying to, two architects who are trying to work in West Bank. They are native from there, but in their architecture practice. These are what you see are illegal Israeli settlements. I don't know how to speak in US. I'm in US since 2 days. I don't know. Should I speak openly or not? But am I going to be arrested?
Landscaping as the horizon of the fluid arc. In the last 40, 50 years, the urbanization of Palestine is driven by a form of conquest of territory. What we are witnessing is a form of very rapid urbanization of cities in order to prevent them from being expropriated. So we're witnessing in large cities such as Ramallah or Nablus or Hebron, a form of conquest of territory. The buildings are more looking as objects that do not really speak to each other and do not depend on the form of master plan or any formalization of territorial configurations. And this is as well impacts the form of the use of materials in architecture and how the material has an impact on the form and the territorial aspect of architecture. Today, more and more than ever, the way architecture is represented in Palestine is linked to the object itself and no more this relationship to nature. Historically, the Palestinian city has been configured around the idea of nature, where we used to have the very dense nucleus and very dense city centers. And the way to preserve nature that is a predominant element of the formalizations of Palestinian cities is being disrupted. Historically, the way city centers spoke to the landscapes were basically creating a very high density city centers while preserving the nature. And preserving nature was achieved by maintaining it free from any form of architecture and construction. Today, this relationship is being disrupted because there's a need of urbanizing the cities and densify the cities from one end, and from another end, in order to preserve these landscapes and preserve them from being expropriated by the occupation, architecture is being used as a tool to mark property and to be certain that these territories are being preserved by forms of architecture.
Various views of looking at modernity, what it is, and how it is manifested in Palestine. One of the major issues talking about urban modernity is the relationship between Ottoman modernity and colonial modernity, which came after the war, when Palestine became part of the British Mandate. And people at the time assumed that before the British came, the Ottomans were some kind of Asiatic mode of control that is backward, did not do anything. But now, with the new interest in critical modernist ideas, we know that there was a major battles going on in the late Ottoman period to modernize the state, to revamp it, to create a legal system from the Tanzimat, which would face the competition from Europe and prevent the Europeans from eating the country. In Palestine, which was the victim of segmentation after the war, when the colonial powers came and divided it, there was an important modernist enterprise going on in the coastal region. And we can see that in Haifa, in Jaffa, and to some extent in places like Gaza, which were commercially connected with the global system through Europe, the cash crops and the buildings and the presence of ethnic minorities, some of whom were Europeans, some like the Greeks and the Italians were from close by shores, introduced systems of building and a lifestyle which contrasted very much with the traditional forms of social organization in the highlands, which is Jerusalem, Nablus, Hebron.
I think this evolution of the city, this evolution of the architecture in the city is also very much linked to the materials used in the city and to the evolution of the use of the material, predominantly stone. Let's say the recent times, but the stone as a material that was used first as a structural material, as a climatic material, and the forms of the city were linked to the use of the material. So the architecture is linked to the shapes that can be built out of stone, since it's a structural material, and the evolution of the material from a structural material to a cladding material has transformed the morphology of the city, bearing in mind that this use of material is superimposed with historical events that are more political, cultural, environmental, that have constituted the environment for the use of the material that is completely different. So this, more specifically, this law on the use of the material put in place in Jerusalem by the British Mandate in 1918 has been now expanded to post-Palestinian cities, where the use of stone is, every building has to be built out of stone. And in the beginning of the century, it was structural stone. Now it's clad stone. And the use of clad stone, although it's a global trend, let's say, or a global transformation in architecture, but here in Palestine, it is linked with political reclaim of territories. So clad stone is linked to something that is in relation with territory. So there is this scales of the use of material that are linked to the urbanization of the city, to the growth of the city. The limits of the city are not really defined because of occupation and because of territorial reclaims. The borders of the city are being developed in a very, let's say, in a way that has nothing to do with architectural references of historical Palestinian cities that are very typological. So the Palestinian city is very typological and not iconic. It is made out of typological spaces that can adapt, transform, be modified in several ways. And in that sense, they're very, very contemporary or very modern because they're not iconic. They can be very much used in very different ways, very different programs, and very different modes of living. So in that sense, they're very contemporary. But in the contemporary architecture of Palestinian cities, those typologies are being disregarded. There are new vocabulary of architecture that is based on consumption of material.
فراش ما ننسى تسألها لفين الفراش حاليا مجال شغلها.
I will give the link, but whenever I speak, interview an architect, I go and interview a construction worker too. Because sometimes the construction worker knows more than the architect. Here I'm asking him how much he earns a day, hourly. Here in West Bank, how much he earns when he goes to Jerusalem. So he has a kind of, I wanted to understand how much the construction worker earns in different way, and yeah, it's important to get to understand also, not as an actor to learn from the architect, but also construction worker and the masters who are running the construction, leading the construction, and they know a lot also about. I will give the link. It's a bit long. I will share, but thank you very much for your patience tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. And yeah, I have so many questions, but I think first, maybe to start sort of where you ended with the entanglement of architecture and infrastructure and this sort of collaboration or link between the two that creates, or I like this, what he said in the documentary about the expansion of infrastructure being a typology, not iconic. And yeah, starting from I guess it maybe if you could say more about this link between architecture and infrastructure, because I think they are one and the same, but the way we study architecture is not taking into account infrastructure. It's infrastructure is always this sort of thing that precedes architecture, but it's not within the design.
Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking a bit opposite. Whenever I am in a review in a studio, or when my colleagues are running a design studio, our infrastructure is very somehow the core, isn't it? I mean, but infrastructure, what scale we are talking, what type we are talking about, you know? It has been understood as a, I mean, what I see always is a kind of a dead structure, but is useful, but is a kind of a dead structure. Always I have the idea that is this structure is a structure, yeah, is a kind of for me it was like when I say threshold infrastructure, or when I see this kind of small scales like a corridor in a camp or concrete tent or city plaza, this building that is temporarily occupied and so on. So I wanted to metaphorically think that, yes, we need an infrastructure, and we consider in between spaces or kind of a survival spaces, maybe not as an infrastructure in a sense of design. Yeah, I don't know. But I wanted to push this concept also. But then when we were thinking about that, when I was thinking about that, Keller came out with this book, this infrastructure book that was also under a lot of discussion. That how infrastructure in many cases, like in Rotterdam, that example that I was talking about in my region, that infrastructure itself became an agency, a political agency itself, and really changed the network of the local entities, the relation, the social network, the political network, the monetary, economical structure, and everything. So I was trying to see that how infrastructure can function in the real sense, also as a threshold, and how the threshold infrastructure is about hosting, hospitality, hosting, and survival. Then the title I have, that helps you to survive, and also creates alliances. It is useful to create alliances. When we had this workshop in Alfavar in Deisha Kam, called titled Autonomous Infrastructure, we wanted to learn in first and second Intifada how people survived without electricity, without school, without core urban daily infrastructure. It was important for us, which was a little bit resembling now the camps that we have in Turkey. How they are surviving with limited water, limited electricity, and so on and so on. I mean, this is core physical infrastructure. Like highways and this and that, and then coming back to more in a discursive sense, how we can think of threshold infrastructure, and how we can think, yes, sociologically, anthropologically, ethnographically. There is a lot of large is rich in this term, many examples, but how we can really think in the design and architecture, how we can design the studio curriculum, through that, this is the difficult part, I think, which is kind of for me. But this educational structure, this unlearning structures, that, for example, Alessandro takes the student to Sicily and just collaborates with the mayor and work there in a fascist settlement entity to transform. I mean, there is a lot of layers there. There is civic participation. There is working with the politics, local politics, and changing and pushing to transform, and having a communality with the local people to understand that this fascist entity can be transformed through design. And then students, they work in the project and they learn also. I mean, everything is together, and I think this is interesting for me, like how to create such kind of unlearning infrastructures that really makes many challenges in the site. I mean,
Yeah, I think what's stuck out for me through all of the projects.
This is the archive, the urgent pedagogies we're doing, and there are, you can use this as many examples. We have a lot of we gathered a lot of examples. We also do issues, and also we interview practitioners, and I mean, if you're interested, there are some videos also of interviews, and a lot of examples. For example, let me check this. This is Amelia. Amelia is an architect, and she's the head of architecture faculty in Umeå in Sweden. And Amelia works with her students a lot in Greece, in the refugee camps in the islands, and she collaborates with Turkish architects from Izmir architecture faculty, and they run together. They co-studio. They make co-studio. They do a collective studio, and they are physically. They try to build shelter for refugees, for example. And you can watch her interview, how she's running this kind of curriculum in an architecture faculty. We have this kind of, I mean, in this portal or platform, we try to gather example from different parts of the world and try to bring them together. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the important part of all of the work is this idea of conversation and facilitating conversation, and also the way that the structure, like the creating the archive for the refugee camp, the structure, even if the camp is temporary, the structure continues in the archive. And the concrete tent being a physical space for a conversation.
Yeah.
And you ask this question, how do we make a decolonial practice stable? And also this idea of flexibility, like how can a space transform? And I wonder what you think
I
is.
want to say something about that. When we say decolonialism, there is a kind of a general, one thing is that there's a similar examples about how extractivist capitalism takes place in many territories, is almost same strategies, and the impact and the outcome is similar. But then the other thing is also, let me give you an example. For example, we were working with Bangladeshi architects. I'm working with Zehra Hussein, who based in there, and she's running an NGO, and she works a lot with local people. But there are many similarities that about Rotterdam, for example, the effect or other kind of project, like the solar companies want to take the villages there too in my region, and there's a lot of, I mean, these kind of things are similar, and how people can resist, how can they go to court cases, how or how in terms of design, education, and architecture, how the architects can help them and so on. This is an issue. But then there is also the worst practice of historical colonialism, that each territory has its own history about colonialism. And this is something different that you need to know and learn too. And this differs than other examples, of course. And then you need to understand accordingly the strategies, which is specific, site specific. So I don't want to generalize when I say that decolonial strategies and it can work with such for educational practice and so on. In different spaces, we need to understand the historical colonialism that's later also the current and what is the effect on the local communities. That is related to racism, that is related to land grabbing and many things, of course, and it comes together. I mean, especially in my region, is very much related to undermining the other cultural communities. Is about racism and so on.
We're open for questions if anyone has any.
But then we can continue in the, yes, please.
Notice the use of the word threshold.
Yeah,
Threshold.
threshold.
I'm wondering if you have a specific meaning for that, or is it more of a, well, what?
Yes,
It's
yes,
like-
yes. I have two ways in using the concept. One is in a real sense that threshold is in between spaces, and metaphorically, I look for some infrastructures in between temporary and permanency. But then I have a friend, a Greek architect, who wrote a book, Stavrides, For Stavros, threshold is more, the scale is neighborhoods, because he did a lot of research on resistance neighborhoods in urban struggle in Latin America and in Greece also. And we worked together a lot, and he was also in Mardin with me, and he knows also my we did a lot of pedagogical projects together too. But Stavros in his book, he defines threshold detailedly, and for him is where the resistance and negotiation happens. Negotiation about public space or the the democracy, radical democracy, you know. And then the threshold where the during the urban struggles, where the resistance, neighborhood resistance is happening. In many projects, in many pedagogical projects of mine, it turns into that kind of threshold, yeah. And then in many cases, like scales of survival, like camps and other kind of survival structure, it turns into more small scale, but kind of a survival, more metaphorically maybe, and also physically a survival spaces. With Stavros, we discussed this a lot. We had together, I think with Stavros and me, we had a discussion in Amman. We were in a conference. Isn't it? No, Nora, you were organizing the conference? Yeah. I remember now. It was about Stavros and me. We were invited to talk about commoning practices. And this was a kind of discussion that, for example, he was seeing the gardening that in Latin America, in the resistance places, that he saw collective gardening a lot. This was before COVID, because during COVID became very important. But then in my case, in the gardens and refugee camps, as a survival spaces. So this was like kind of a discussion that how threshold changes, but it's about communality, survival, resistance, especially for Stavros is more like a political resistance in the yeah. It's very nice book. I made it translate to Turkish for my students, so my student can read in Turkish because their English is not so good. So it's very inspiring. Yeah.
Question. I want to, you are talking about a top project, which is very nice. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you, first of all. And I wonder, can you share your experience with working, or can you share your experience working with the institution in such spaces like Chamber of Architects or Law Bureau or and
Yeah.
others?
Yeah.
Because I know that sometimes it may be hard to work with them, but sometimes it is easier to get easier to do something together. And I find it very important to work with this kind of local institutions.
Mhm.
But as I say, sometimes it is not so easy. So I wonder
Why not easy?
maybe because of the regional oppression, or sometimes, as you may know, you've already been there for a very long time. So that because of some oppression, they cannot function. This institution cannot function very well, I guess.
I just want to give information for who are not from Turkey here. The architecture chambers are governmental entities, but they are non-governmental. I don't know how to describe, but they have their own budget, they have their own policy. Normally it's protected by the government, by state. Let's say state, not government, state. And but they're against government. They are state entity, but against government. I'm saying that they are really all working on the rights, urban rights and the dwelling rights, and they are following court cases. They are criticizing the government for any illegal act and so on. At the same time, you may know they are official institution that if you want to do your practice, if you want to open an office, you need to register to the chambers. I mean, this is, I think here too in US is the same. There is urban planner, although these are they are institute of profession, I mean. My relation is that, of course, I'm not an architect. Even if I would be an architect, I would not get registered to those institutions, because sometimes I found it very oppressive, you know, that you have to register, otherwise you cannot practice your architectural practice and so on. I'm lucky, I'm a sociologist, I don't need to, but I collaborate with them because especially in this region, I think it's very important that they are active. Because the government does a lot of illegal acts against the Hefsel Garden, for example. They want to open for private interests. They want to build a lot of industrial zones on grazing land and kicking out the villages and families and nomads, you know. And in that sense, you can call the chambers, urban planner chambers, and the architect chambers, and they have the right to shoot the government, and they do, and they won, and this is good, you know, this in that sense. The other thing is that I do a lot of workshop with them. They invite, or they ask what to do, you know. They like other discipline people, you know. This is very nice also. They're open, and then it is good for, and they can reach all the architecture students. They have a large audience, planning and architecture design student, and this is also very handy for us. But is dangerous, of course. I mean, because they are known, and if you want to do a workshop, always police comes with me, you know, like 10 police waiting with me always. And once I thought there is a demonstration in Diyarbakir, and I said, is it a demonstration? They said, no. Professor Tan, we came for you. There is no demonstration? I mean, so you need to hang out with the police, you know, like, I mean, for a while. But at the same time, it's very important to know your rights about dwelling, know your rights about urban space and public space, and they do a lot of reports, as you know, they reporting.
Which is very important.
Yes, these are important, I think, because we, as a sociologist, we use those reports. We try to understand in what scale, what is the policy, and so on. You know, many sociologists doesn't know that. You know, I don't know, so we have to always read the planning and the chambers reports about specific cases. Suriçi report, for example. You know, I mean, for example, I mean, this neighborhood in Diyarbakir. I mean, these kind of things is important, I think. If their task, what they're doing, I mean.
Thank you very much. I just want to learn, I just want to ask your experience, because I'm also from Diyarbakir, and I know sometimes it may be very challenging to do some kind of walks or some kind of workshops. I was also participating some of them, and we were having a walk in Hefsa Gardens, and always, as we say, there are some polices are coming, or they are always interested if we come together, we will do something, we will do kind of a demonstration or not. They just want to make sure. That's why I just want.
I mean, it's an oppressive, very difficult region. It's not Istanbul or other places, of course.
Even in Istanbul or other places.
Yeah, now it's difficult. Yeah. Even now, yeah. Maybe we can move for a drinks or something. It's a bit long. I feel that I kept you here a long time with many bombing, many. We can discuss, of course.
I mean, if there
I have time.
no other questions, speak now. Yes.
Yeah, just very quick. So thank you so much for this very rich presentation, and also to bring us so close to humanity with this project. I think it's a time that we need to be very close to humanity. In terms of design, you said or you mentioned how it is much more important to really not overlook what is already existing there, what is being designed by, let's say, what is existing there, people, nature, etc. Can you talk a little bit about that momentum, that participatory momentum that could probably exist in that process?
Can I have your question again? You speaking about this region where I am, or are you asking in general?
I'm not sure if you mentioned it as in general, or you
Huh.
connected that to a project, might be connected to the project of the gardens, or maybe.
I'm sorry,
not-
I'm
I don't
sorry?
remember now.
Huh. I'm sorry, I try to understand the examples that you.
No, you just, I mean, just to make it very much simpler, when you show one of the projects, you mentioned that it is important to, instead of, for students to go there and design something,
Yeah,
instead of
yeah.
watching the process of the communities designing their own,
Yeah,
forming themselves.
yeah.
and creating themselves.
You know, my master student who designed the Midyat refugee camp after the advanced architecture studio, this was the master studio course. She said, "Oh, I did a mistake. I shouldn't design that way." You know, like he was totally. I should have taken this course before and so on. He was really thinking that he did a totally a wrong design. Firstly, of course, UN gives a kind of manual of this
Right.
refugee camp design. You know, there is a, I think Manuel Hertz, this, my colleague, this architect, he criticized this. So there's a standards design model for refugee camps. And this is what they mostly given those architects and the urban planning department of the government, that they design accordingly, you know. And then when we did the other way around, like asking the people how they are spending their collective spaces, how they are, I mean, they did some TV spaces, you know, but in the TV spaces, the woman and man doesn't sit together. The woman want to sit in another place. The man also, you know, that this kind of gender issues and religious and belief, like the Yazidis are totally different. They have a leader, and this leader is sometimes a woman leader, or yeah, I mean, and then they have a different kind of daily cycle. They use the space differently. They need to pray in the morning in the sunrise, and then they have to pray again in the sunset. And they need a space for that. Even the belief system, the cultural ethnic identities, the genders issues, everything changed, and they use differently the space. And this was that one mistake. If you design upside down in a refugee camp or any other temporary settlement, that assuming that the Syrian refugees are coming, or we will give them a TV room and that, and washing room and this and that. People use differently. I mean, they have a kind of a community rules, you know. Even building this corridor, this SED woman, they don't want to sit outside, just on the front of the tent. You know, they need a kind of a semi-public space. So they built themselves this kind of long corridor connecting halfly their tent. You know, so I think this is important that my student understood that how. In that sense, the user is, I mean, when they do a real estate company apartment, luxury apartment, users became more important, user's choice, you know. But if you do a refugee camp, user choice doesn't matter, you know, like, so you can see also the class differences and the level of vulnerability, you know, and so on, and how it is affecting, how you will give the design decision. What is your design principle in such case? This becomes very important. I think this kind of discussion, I remember in my studios, in my friends' studios, is not given. You know, I mean, people don't speak about that. You know, and the scale is important. Like designing, I mean, designing one toilet. There was a studio, or topic was that designing a public toilet. I mean, it's very difficult designing a public toilet. I mean, VJ, you know, like VC or what. And I think scale, I'm thinking more than the architects sometimes thinking. But if I work with some, most of my colleagues are architects, when we work together, I think a lot about scale, physical space, scale, how we can make it squeeze and large, and what will function for what. I think it's a very difficult task designing the scale in what for what, you know, this question and the answer. What is the scale of threshold? I mean, what kind of threshold, what kind of scale should be, you know? I think it's very difficult for me. Maybe for designer more easy. I don't know, but I know when we are together, it's really difficult to discuss about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.